Well, welcome to the next edition of EHM and LTV's Homegrown. It's a pleasure to be back here at the LTV studios. And tonight, have the honor of chatting with Andy Aledort, and I've got his new book, Texas Flood. I hope let me hold this up properly. This is pretty impressive, Andy. Thanks for doing this tonight. I appreciate it.
Oh, Harry, thanks so much for having me. I appreciate it.
This is kind of intimidating because I feel like you've interviewed every artist known to man, so to speak. So it's kind of cool for a chance to chat with you and to learn from you in a way, I was thinking.
We could list the people I haven't interviewed.
Well,
Da Vinci, Salvador Dali, Picasso. I didn't get to them, unfortunately.
Well, thank you for doing this. This is home. Yes, unfortunately, just missed by a couple of years.
But I did a bunch of others.
But thank you for being here. And it's interesting to chat with you. You have a storied career over the past 35 plus years of everything that's been going on, and kind of interesting to see you've taken a different journey than a lot of people. Where, in a way, you've kind of done it your own way. That's worked for you, and it's kind of grown and blossomed over the years. And I kind of want to get into that. Part of Homegrown is to kind of chat with you, learn a little bit about your background and where you're from, and kind of where, in a way, how you got to be here today. And we're coming off an interesting year, that's for sure. So I'm sure we'll get into that.
Interesting is a good word to use. It's been very interesting.
As things change over time. I'm curious, where are you from on the island?
Well, I grew up in Queens, in the last town of Queens in Little Neck. And, you know, anybody from Queens, when they're accused of being from Long Island, they get very upset and say, I'm from the city, man. You know, Queens is one of the boroughs. And then it'll be pointed out that Queens is like the size of a postage stamp, as part of Long Island. But it's still Queens. So I'm from Little Neck in Queens. I was born in 1956. And just until very recently, my mom was still living in the house I grew up in. She passed away almost 3 summers ago. This August it'll be 3 summers. She was 93, and she still lived in the house in Little Neck. And so my mother actually was a very important person in my life in terms of what I ended up doing with my life. She had been a singer and a part-time actress, sort of community theater stuff, but much more interested in working as a singer. And so the environment I grew up in, we had a piano in the house. She played a lot of standards. You know, she played Irving Berlin and George Gershwin and, just all kinds of that kind of music. And then she had an amazing record collection, and it was everything from that kind of music, jazz standards and Ella Fitzgerald and Billie Holiday and stuff like that. Frank Sinatra, but she was more of a Tony Bennett fan. So I remember being 5 years old, I think, 5 or 6, 1961, when I Left My Heart in San Francisco came out, Tony Bennett, and it was a new record. And then she had blues records, too. She had Josh White, Sonny Terry, Brownie McGhee, Lead Belly,
it was an interesting time, too, because you were just starting to and heading towards the 60s as you were growing up in your teens. There was a lot of changes happening in music, too.
Right.
So she was kind of giving you a great foundation, it sounds like. And then you kind of built on it with what was going up as you were growing up. What were you, if I'm not mistaken, you were more of an artist, though, right? Where you were not just
definitely.
Were you a painter and that kind of thing, or drawing? Or?
Well, as early as I can remember. Well, I've got to throw this in there. Right before I was born, she bought a guitar. She bought an acoustic guitar.
Before you were born?
Yes. And so, all guitar players, the common thread is, hey, what was your first guitar? Or when did you get your first guitar? And so to be a name dropper, I was having this conversation with Jimmy Vivino, the guitar player from Conan O'Brien show, who's been a good friend for a long time, about what was your first guitar and when did you get it? And I said, well, a few months before I was born, my mom was pregnant with me, and she bought a Guild F20 acoustic guitar in 1955. So he said, so the guitar was there before you? I said, yes. The guitar beat me to the house. And I remember crawling on the floor, and the case would be there, and I'd open the case, and I would just, pick a string.
Wow, right off the bat. Now, did your mom play, or?
She played some guitar, but I was fascinated by this contraption, and I would and this is, I remember this, I would pick a string and I would go like this. Or it would be more like this, like, and in my mind's eye, it was like a cowboy riding into town. Like you'd first see him from far away, and then he'd get closer.
Crescendo and yes.
And then he was like going away again.
Now, did you take lessons growing up, or how? Like, when did you actually start to? Because it sounds like you were involved in a lot of different artistic
just to answer
endeavors.
your art question. So, but I was drawing. You know, like it was just something that wasn't. It was just happening on its own. So when I was 5 years old, I was just drawing all the time, you know. I mean, what do you give a 5-year-old? I had pencils and colored pencils and crayons, but I mean, it was obvious that it was something I was obsessed with. I was doing it all the time. So, you know, when I was very young, I don't know, 6, 7, something like that, my mom signed me up for painting lessons, and I would go to the basement of a Lutheran church on Bell Boulevard in Bayside, and this older woman taught me how to do watercolors and stuff. But so it was nice. It was, I have to say, I loved drawing, and it was always something that held my interest tremendously. And music was just there. You know, it was like being immersed in music, everything, like I was saying, from classical music. And also, you know, she would put on a Segovia record or Vicente Gomez or Chet Atkins, like it was guitar too. So it was all there without somebody going, hey, that's the guitar, you should listen to the guitar because you're going to be a guitar player. Like it
was a natural portion of your life growing up.
Yes, it was just there, you know, and you know, for me and many people my age, I was 7, just about to turn 8 in 1964. February 9th, 1964, when the Beatles first appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show. And that was like the big bang, you know, that affected just about everyone. I want to be the 5th Beatle, you know. It was, everything about it was attractive. They were so cool. They were phenomenal, first of all, because we didn't know that they'd been doing it for 6 years, 10 hours a day. By the time they show up on the Ed Sullivan Show, it was nothing to them to go out there and play these songs, you know, in their sleep and do it so well. So that's when, you know, I was like, you know, I'm going to learn, you know, a C chord and a G chord and a D chord and an A minor chord and E minor chord. And I even wrote a song, first thing, like the first day, that just used all those chords. I wish I could remember how it went.
So this was something that, as you were growing up, you knew that you wanted to do something in music.
Well, I mean, I liked music a lot, and I loved the Beatles, and it became a thing among me and all my friends, and I'm sure it was like this for everyone. The second a new Beatle album came out, you'd go to Corvettes and buy it and try to memorize every song, and then you'd have, like, you go to your buddy's house, and it was sort of, you know, like a challenge, you know, like a big throwdown. Yeah. You know, who knew the most Beatles songs and could sing them and knew the words. But it was genuine excitement that everyone had. Beatlemania was a real, palpable thing that if you grew up in that era, I mean, it was as real as, you know, like being afraid of being hit by a speeding car or something. You know, it was a real thing. And then you'd put that new Beatle record on, and it was just too much. You couldn't believe, like, every new record that came out had so many incredible songs on it. So I got a book, a Golden Beatles songbook, and started to, you know, be able to play.
Did you take lessons, or were you kind of just teaching yourself?
Not yet, but my sister had an acoustic guitar.
Okay.
And, you know, it was like the folk, you know, before a little bit, or simultaneous, early 60s, you had the big folk boom. So, you know, you had Pete Seeger and people playing If I Had a Hammer and Woody Guthrie songs, and that was all tied to socio-political views and civil rights. And, you know, so you couldn't separate the power or importance of the music or the lyrics from what was going on in society in America. And then this guy comes along named Bob Dylan, and so that gets reinforced even more, like, you know, it's not just like somebody going, like he's singing about really important things about our society and the world. And Phil Oakes had a song called Small Circle of Friends, and it was, political commentary. Or he has a song called Change, which is a beautiful song. So it was an explosion, a renaissance, absolutely. And I started playing guitar at 67 when I was 11, but art was my thing all the way up to when I first went to college, School of Visual Arts, when I was 17. But it was just like this sort of crazy. The second I started college to get a Bachelor of Fine Arts and School of Visual Arts, I started to also play guitar for 6 or 7 hours a day and formed my
So that was kind of the start of kind of saying, all right, I need to get, not serious about it, but you wanted to learn and get
really
better.
serious about it. Like it went from something that I wasn't serious about. Like when I was 12, my friends that were either the same age as me or like a little bit older, 14, 15 years old, I would be amazed watching them play. It was like incredible. Like I said, I knew like one, Leslie Westlick. Like that was about all I knew. Like one Mick Taylor lick. Like that was it. I didn't know anything else.
No, you went away to college. You didn't. It was at college you started really playing for hours.
Well, what I should say is that before I went to School of Visual Arts, I graduated high school early. So at the end of December of 72, January 73, I'm still 16 years old, and I go to University of Hartford as a freshman. And so it was very nerve-wracking to be in college and be 16 years old, and my roommates were freshmen also, and they were 19 years old. And the 19-year-old girls are incredibly scary anyway, but they're even scarier when you're 16.
I bet.
But in the next room, next to my room that I shared with two other guys, was a tiny little room, and the guy in that room by himself was a guy named Tom Mariano, who was graduating the Hart School of Music, which was part of the University of Hartford. And he was the star musician of the school. He was an incredible keyboard player. And from the first days of being there, he had a Fender Rhodes, which is an electric piano, in his room. And he would put a Chick Corea record on, or a Keith Jarrett record, or a Bill Evans record, and he would play along to the record. He was a phenomenal musician, aside from being able to play full-blown, classical repertoire. And then he'd lift the needle and say, "Oh, this is what Chick Corea is doing, and this is what Bill Evans is doing." And we were very stoned also. So, he is the one who really inspired me to play. He would say, "Go get your guitar and play." Or he had a stand-up bass in his room. He'd say, "Andy, play bass." And I'd go, "Tom, I don't know how to play bass." He'd say, "I don't care." And so I would just be hitting notes, and he would be listening to me and make it sound like music. And to make a long story short, I always wondered what happened to Tom Mariano. He was the most incredible musician. I mean, he was the first guy I met who lived and breathed and slept music. And if you had music in your life, you had no worries. He was a very happy person, very up person. And that was, to be around somebody like that was so inspiring. I mean, he was just bursting with music and the love of, he even took my guitar. He didn't know how to play guitar. He said, "Can I borrow your guitar?" Wow. And I said, "Sure." And he sat outside, and within like an hour, he could play guitar like pretty well.
So that was kind of the inspiration to learn and to kind of figure out more about the guitar and just get better by working with him.
It just, something happened, inside me in terms of my own drive to learn about it was from being around him. And
whatever happened to him as a musician?
Well, I'm about to get to that. And so that was 73. And then starting around 1978, I was always a big Frank Zappa fan, so I'd go see Frank Zappa. And I had tickets, in fact, to see Frank Zappa at the Fillmore East for the album that came out, The Mother's Alive at the Fillmore East, the white cover with pencil, June 6, 1971. And I didn't go because I had to go to my cousin's wedding. My mom said, I was 15. She says, "Oh, you can't go to a concert. You have to go to your cousin Janice's wedding." I didn't know the Fillmore was closing. And that would be it. I would never have the chance to go to the Fillmore or see the Mothers, or that it came out as an album a year later, the concert I didn't get to go to. And I showed my mother the album when it came out. I go, you see this? This was the concert I was supposed to go to. And she goes, oh, good, you can hear it now. And I'm like, no.
And you got to go to the wedding. It's both best of both worlds.
Yeah, well,
not really,
no,
but
not
yes.
at all. So, but around 78, this guy started to play with Frank Zappa named Tommy Mars. And so, to me, he was Tommy Mars. And it was Tom Mariano. But I didn't know.
A small world.
Didn't think of it because he had lost a lot of weight. He'd shaved off his beard. He looked different. And he was Tommy Mars.
Yeah,
and I usually didn't sit very close. So 3 years go by of me seeing dozens of Frank Zappa shows, seeing Tommy Mars play and sing.
Funny.
And then in 81, I went to the Palladium, and it was one of the only times I had seats in the second row. And I was a little early, so I go to the second row, and Tommy's standing on the stage, like leaning over, talking to people. So it's Tommy Mars, right? I'm at a Frank Zappa show, and so it's Tommy Mars. He'd gained some weight back, and he grew back his beard. And it just hit me, and I went, oh, my God, that's Tom Mariano. That's the same guy. And the whole show I was going back and forth. So I went back the next day in the afternoon and sent a note in. It was some ridiculous note that was like, hi, I live next door to you in the dorm,
Sure they never get that note before, though.
And he came out. And he's like, I remember you.
That's funny.
And you're a good guitar player. It was like, and so anyhow, that's what happened to Tom Mariano. He was, if you listen to Frank Zappa records, he's Tommy Mars. But he was really the first guy that made me feel like, really inspired me. I do have to add that my first guitar teacher when I was 11 was a guy named Joe Monk, who is like the 1 degree of separation from 5 generations of guitar players on Long Island, because he taught from 1960 until like 2002 for 50 years. And and he was an incredible guitar player. He played like a Joe Pass, but he was very funny. And I realized later, because I've done a lot of teaching, that I learned a lot about teaching from Joe Monk.
That's interesting. I want to get into that in a little bit. Why don't we do a song? We're with Andy Aledort here on Homegrown on LTV, and we'll get more. I want us to kind of chat about how you got involved with instructions and kind of figuring out that, and then, of course, getting on the road with some great players.
Yeah.
We'll get into that in a little bit. It's Homegrown. Thanks, Andy.
Maybe I'll play a blues song. Just for fun. I had my fun. If I don't get well on no more, I had my fun. If I don't get well on no more, my health's been failing me. Feel like I'm going down slow. Don't send for no doctor now. Doctor won't do me no good. Don't send for no doctor now. Doctor won't do me no good. It's all my fault. I never did like I should. Oh, please write my mother, baby. Won't you tell her the shape I'm in? Write my mother now. Please tell her the shape I'm in. Ask her to pray for me. Forgive me for my sin.
Very nice. Andy Aledort here on LTV and EHM's Homegrown. Thanks for being here tonight. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Harry.
You were taking lessons at such a young age and kind of learning things as you went. I'm curious, when did you feel, I don't want to say confident, but when did you know that this was, all right, I can do this as a career, and I'm a good player. I know I've got it.
You're assuming that it happened at some point.
Well, at some point, because it's interesting because you went away to college. You went to Hartford, and if I'm not mistaken, you left and went to the city after that.
Yeah, I was just up in Hartford for one semester, and they had an art school as part of their university. And, you can file this under never take guidance from a high school guidance counselor. But it dawned on me that if I wanted to study art, being in Hartford, Connecticut was not necessarily the best place to be in 1970.
Nothing against Hartford, but yes, there's a lot going on.
If I wanted to get into, life insurance, I think it would have been a perfect place. But I mean, 1973, New York City is the place to be, for the art world, and Soho and all the art galleries, and I mean, the early 70s. And so I was at School of Visual Arts from 1973 to 1977. It was just the most fantastic time to be in New York City every single day, at night, and come home at 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, and then just go back the next morning and go to all the art galleries. Wow. And then, there were the clubs in Max's Kansas City and Mercer Art Center and CBGB's. And, New York was an exploding, thriving artistic place in the early 70s. And then School of Visual Arts itself as a school was a terrific school, and almost all the teachers were artists. And so it was great. But in 74, I put my first band together, which was a trio, guitar, bass, and drums. I was obsessed with Jimi Hendrix, and so was my drummer, a guy named Ed Cavaceno, who he could play, no exaggeration, exactly like Mitch Mitchell, Jimi Hendrix's drummer, who has a very distinctive style, tremendous amount of technical facility, very complicated. Very few people could sound like Mitch Mitchell. But Ed, he did the drum parts for all my instructional stuff years later. My DVDs, How to Play the Songs of Our Experience or Access Bold as Love or Electric Ladyland. And then I ended up meeting Mitch Mitchell and Billy Cox, the guys who played with Jimi Hendrix, and touring with them and recording with them. And Mitch Mitchell said to me one day, "I'm mad at you." I said, "Why?" And he goes, "You used my drum tracks without asking me." So here's Mitch Mitchell. He heard
it's the ultimate compliment, though. Wow.
He heard my buddy Ed Cavaceno, who I met when I was 13, and thought that it was him.
That's amazing.
So I said
I hope
to Mitch,
you told him that. Yes.
I said to Mitch, well, I'm going to tell my friend Ed, who's playing drums, that, you thought it was you, because he idolizes you, and that's like the greatest thing anybody could ever say. So we played in 74 probably like 30 Hendrix songs, along with Johnny Winter and Mountain and Frank Zappa. Power trio. We were a power trio, guitar, bass, drums. So a little bit of Zeppelin, and definitely Mountain and Robin Trower. And so the answer to your question is, after being together for about a year and maybe only playing, 3 gigs or 4 gigs or something, we had a gig at CW Post in the Rathskeller, their little bar, where they served muffins or something, in the afternoon. And I'll never forget, we were playing a Hendrix song, Message of Love. And I mean, it took all my concentration to play and sing, so I couldn't even be aware that the audience was out there or anything. But this was the first time we were playing, and then I sort of was able to go on autopilot long enough to sort of be in the third person. Wow. And I looked out, and I just saw everyone was dancing, and it dawned on me like, wow, we can stand up here and do this.
It's working.
And they'll like it.
Yeah.
Like, those people will enjoy it, which will allow us to continue to do it. And it was like a little revelation, like, this could work. This could actually be okay. And so, like all musicians, I just continued to play and try to become, better at the instrument. And personally, I like just about any kind of music with guitar. So I was working on Hendrix and blues rock and Eric Clapton and Cream and stuff like that, and Johnny Winter, but also would play bluegrass, with certain friends, and jazzy music, try to learn about standards with other friends. And I mean, that's the great thing about the guitar is it's the guitar itself is at home on all of these different environments, like completely different environments. Everything from, where were you, my blue-eyed son? Everything from, straight folk music, to Joe Pass and Pat Martino style jazz, or Purple Haze, Jimi Hendrix. The guitar is capable of all these things. It's kind of amazing.
It's interesting to see how, and I'm not to say it's direct, but I imagine the influence of your mother, and to see that as you get older with all different styles of music. What was the impetus to say, hey, I want to try to figure out a way to teach others how to play the guitar? And also, you created kind of your own system that really standardized it, too. When did that happen out of college? How many years after?
Well, the system you're referring to has to do with writing it down, which is the terminology is, or the term for it is transcribing, transcriptions. That's sort of its own thing. But as far as teaching, from very early on, I mean, like I said, I didn't really get serious about playing guitar until I was just turning 17. But when I was 15, I could play. Gun in your hand. So as soon as I knew how to do that, I would show other people how to do it. I'd say, hey, want to learn? Hey, Joe. So I started teaching really as soon as I would learn something. I'd offered to teach it to someone if they were interested in learning it. And then I, along with playing, taught. When I got out of college more, while I was in college, I was definitely busy with having to, do paintings and sculptures and drawings and films, and, I studied animation and film history, and then I'd have enough time at night to go to band practice, and do that. So I wasn't teaching very much in those years. As soon as I got out of college, I started to teach a lot because it was a way to make some money, and I became a house painter for 6 years, which was also really great because I could be my own boss, make decent money. It was rough on the hands,
I'd imagine,
and the hours, because if I get up at 6:30, 7 in the morning and get to a house, start painting at, let's say, the latest 8 a.m., and because I was by myself, I knew I'd make the most money per day by getting the most done. So I would try to paint until 6 o'clock, like put a good 10-hour day in. And so I fell asleep on a lot of gigs.
I can imagine.
We used to play at a place.
It's a long day.
We used to play, me and a buddy of mine named Mike Barry, who I have a storied career with out east here, because every Wednesday night in 1982, we would play at Snuggler's Cove, which is Astro's Pizza, right down the street from the Talk House. And but a little before that, when I was painting houses, we used to play this place in the city called JP's. And I would fall asleep, on the gigs. I'm sure I wasn't any fun to play with because I'd been painting houses, for 6 months, getting up every morning, and halfway through a song, I'd be just sleeping. So, so eventually in '83, I started to do transcriptions for a company called Cherry Lane Music, guitar transcriptions of rock songs like Stairway to Heaven, or, with including like exactly how did Jimi Hendrix play the solo on Purple Haze, or Jimmy Page the solo on Stairway to Heaven, or any of those things. Writing those things out was something that was not available in the United States in 1983. Wow. Full-blown guitar transcriptions like that had been available in Japan, because like most things, the Japanese, when they tackle something, they tackle it all the way. So a guy, an American guy who had been writing for Japanese magazines, pitched Cherry Lane Music which was headed by a guy named Milt Oken, who produced John Denver and Laura Nyro and like lots of incredible artists, and he was a great guy. And his company was a music publishing company. A guy named John Stick said to him, "Hey, let's have a guitar magazine, and we're just going to make it. We'll just make it the exact same format as Guitar and Young Guitar in Japan, which is there's going to be big splashy photos and then full-blown transcriptions." And the first transcription I did was Sultans of Swing, and it was 21 pages long. And anybody who knows anything about magazines, you know, for every editorial page, you have to have an advertising page to pay for the editorial page. So 21 pages of music in the middle of a magazine.
It's almost unheard of.
It's not really going to work.
Yeah.
So good. But I had to develop nomenclature to indicate, you know, in a written way, some things that are peculiar to the guitar, you know, like harmonics or vibratos and string bends or pull-offs, hammers, a hammer-on, slides. Like there's all these idiosyncratic things about playing the instrument that if you want to communicate that, you know, as a directive in the music, you know, like a classical violinist, it might say sans bow, meaning the next series of notes, the violinist won't use a bow, he'll pick with the fingers. And there's a whole bunch of, you know, sforzando and, you know, allegre and, you know, things that are in Italian. But for instance, like Jimi Hendrix loved to fret chords with his thumb over the top.
Yeah.
So that was Little Wing. So I wanted it to be in the transcription. Yeah. This note has to be fretted with your thumb. So, you know, I wasn't the only guy, but there weren't too many of us that were sort of hammering out what would eventually become generally accepted terminology, you know, iconography, whatever you want to call it, symbols and how to write a vibrato, a pull-off, a hammer-on, and then tremolo arm and feedback and finger tapping, all the things Eddie Van Halen
I'd imagine that made you a better player, too, because you were literally learning everything, every kind of, and it seems like every kind of music and different artists and different ways to do it, and you were kind of growing as a guitar player, too.
The way it helped me the most was my ear, because people would ask, how do you listen to a record and know, like, figure out what the guy's doing? Yeah. And it's just like any language, you know, you have to be steeped in it, and the more you are, you'll recognize repeated patterns, or it's just like learning the English language, you know. Most of us don't remember how we learned to speak because we were too young, you know, to remember that. And then if you try to, you know, learn French or Spanish or Chinese or Russian when you're an adult, it's so much harder to learn because it's not like we're kids. But you can tune your ear so that you can hear faster, recognize quicker, just like language. That's what you want. You want the amount of time between hearing something and knowing what it is to be almost indistinguishable, you know. And it will happen. Yeah. And that's how transcribing helped me the most, because it got to the point where I could hear, oh, that's in the key of G, even though I don't have perfect pitch. Some musicians have perfect pitch, which means they'll hear somebody, you know, drop a wrench on the floor and they'll go B flat, you know. I don't have perfect pitch. But it got to the point where, for example, if you handed me a guitar that was totally out of tune and I tuned it, it would probably be really, really, really close to being tuned to the correct pitch. I mean, the strings would be in tune with each other, but if, like this would really be an E, it's just because it's so ingrained, you know, that vibration or whatever it is. So that's what transcribing and all that listening, listening to, and lots of music that I didn't want to play, I wasn't going to play Ozzy Osbourne songs and songs, by Rush or the whole variety of bands whose music I wasn't going to play. It wasn't, so I wasn't learning to play those songs, but I was learning to hear and recognize
a great distinction,
sounds and write them down. And so, of course, that ability is going to, help me recognize those same sounds and patterns and musical relationships in any kind of music.
No, that's great. I want to talk more about that coming up, but I also want to talk about how you kind of transitioned to doing a lot of artist interviews and getting to know artists, including Stevie Ray Vaughan. And I want to get into that in just a sec. Why don't we do another song? And I want to chat about the book that just came out a little while ago, and we'll kind of get into that next. What would you like to do?
Maybe we'll do another new one. For the radio show, we did a new song called This Physical World. And so I'm going to do another brand new song. As I was saying before, once I finally wrapped my mind around COVID, I actually started to, be productive in some sort of a way.
So you're working on a new record?
Yeah, you could say that.
We're kind of putting together from over the years all those songs into a new record.
Yeah, I mean, I have a lot of songs that I, going back to 2004. There's a song we did a thing at the Talk House in October that Nancy Atlas put together, which was great, called the Friday Night Hustle. And I have to give her all the credit. She got the camera crew and the sound people together, and she got people to fund it and got all the artists in there. And so she ended up getting like 6 shows that she could show, to a stream every Friday night. And we even did a New Year's Eve show. Like, there was so much material. And so one of the songs I played on that show was a song called Light of Love. And that's a song that, I wrote, probably like the late 90s or something like that. There you are, and there you go. It's in your heart, I wish that I could know. Do you want the same things as me? Love of life is so running. But I've never put that on a record, so that's going to be on this record that's going to come out, even though the song's 20 years old. But I'm going to play a song now that's a newer one. So that's what I was saying. When I, finally embraced COVID, I started to write. And this is another one. I did This Physical World for EHM, one I've never played before, outside my office. So this is another one of those songs I've never played. We'll see what happens, bouncing off the sidewalls. This one's called Look Away, My Love. From the start, try to heal this broken heart. Days gone by, only left to wonder why. All along, just looking for a song, like a bird on a wing. Seems so easy to sing. So look away, my love, look away, my love, look away, my love, won't you please? Look away, my love, look away, my love, 'cause if you want to be free. You won't see me. There was a love like a grace from the God above, like a song when things turn from right to wrong. After all we had, never thought it could be so sad. Like a rising sun, new life has begun. So look away, my love, look away, my love, look away, my love, if you wanna see. Look away, my love, look away, my love, 'cause if you want to be free, you won't see me. All my life I tried to do it right, but in spite I often lost that fight. We both know, often lost my way. But if you go, I'll dream of the day. So look away, my love, look away, my love, look away, my love, if you wanna be. Look away, my love, look away, my love, you will finally see. Look away, my love, look away, my love, look away, my love, if you wanna see. Look away, my love, look away, my love, 'cause if you want to be free, you won't see me.
Very nice. Andy Aledort here on LTV and EHM's Homegrown. And there's so much I want to talk to you about, but I want to make sure we chat about the book.
Yes, sir.
Which came out, I think, in the fall of 2019. Congratulations.
Thank you so much.
First off, and let me hold this up here, make sure I get it right to
Yes,
the
look at
camera.
that beautiful
There we go.
cover that St. Martin's Press
Right over here, there we go.
put all kinds of money into.
It looks great, and what's interesting about it is it's really just a lot of recollections, and you spoke to so many different people. I guess.
Oh, God, yeah.
Well, what I find interesting about your career, and just to quickly tie it all together, is that I feel like it all was leading towards the ability to do these things, to go out with Double Trouble in the 90s, and then Dickie Betts, where you really had perfected, you learned a lot about the music, you built the relationships with Guitar World, and just being out there. And you put this whole book together. I'm curious, when did you meet Stevie Ray Vaughan initially? Because you have a great interview, if I'm not mistaken, up on your website that I checked out earlier.
Yes, up on my website is one of the interviews with Stevie. I think the one that's up there is from 1989.
Okay.
When he was about to release his last studio album, In Step. And if you go to my website, andyaledort.com, there's lots of cool stuff up there. There's a lot of instructional stuff and links to podcasts and different things. But also, there's an interview page. And right now up there are printed interviews that you can read, in text with Jeff Beck and Richie Blackmore, Stevie Ray Vaughan, Leslie West, Johnny Winter. Hope I didn't say their names too fast. But the coolest part for me is at the bottom of the page, you could go straight to it if you want to, is audio from those interviews.
Wow.
So, Leslie West, he just passed away recently. But, I mean, he's a guy, this is the thing, Harry, that's like crazy to me is I got to become friends with people that were my biggest heroes when I was young. And so Johnny Winter was someone that I saw on his comeback tour in 1973, still alive and well. I saw him at the Garden, and it was completely packed, and he was like the biggest rock star in the world then. And for the next 3-4 years was the highest paid rock performer. And I met him in the late 80s and became friends with him. And then, by the 2000s, I would go to his house in Houston, Connecticut, and we would sit and play guitar together. And I would be sitting there going, like, that's Johnny Winter, like, 2 feet from me. Like, it's just, how could that be? Like, how could this be happening? This is the same guy who, to this day, if I put on, the original version of Rock and Roll Hoochie Coo from the Johnny Winter Around studio album, or, Second Winter, Highway 61, let's say, I became friends with that guy. Like, how could that be? Now, I have to tell you this. So part of the unrealness of all this is one day, and we'll say it was about 10 years ago, I'm outside raking leaves, and my cell phone rings, and I take it out, and I can see that it's a guy named Paul Nelson, who is Johnny Winter's manager. So I answer the phone, "Hey, Paul," and he goes, "Oh, hey, we're out on the road. Johnny wants to talk to you." And I go, "Okay." So Johnny gets on the phone. He goes, "You were in my dream last night." I go, "What?" "You were in my dream last night." And I go, "That wasn't a dream. That had to be a nightmare." And he goes, "No, man, you were in my dream. And you were playing guitar. You sounded really good." And I went, "That was a dream." And then he hung up.
That's great.
And I was holding the phone. But I mean, Johnny Winter called me because I was in his dream. Like, this is ridiculous. It's just the most wonderful, it's a beautiful thing. And he was he was just I have so many stories. He was such a funny person. But this is what happened, everything just, to use a word that's overused, and I don't even know what it means, organic. Things happened if organic has a meaning, that's the way that things happened. I played guitar, and I was a guitar player that got involved in writing for guitar magazines. And by default, I had to learn to write and edit, and just over the years started taking on more and more responsibilities in the music publishing world, from transcribing to writing books to interviewing people to writing columns to ghost writing columns. Like, you'd say, "Oh, Eddie Van Halen wants to do a bunch of lessons, but he'll never sit down and write it. That's not going to happen."
So you're the guy actually writing it.
Yeah, which is totally fine with me. Or B.B. King, or Buddy Guy, or Billy Corgan from Smashing Pumpkins, or Jerry Cantrell from Alice in Chains, or Mike McCready from Pearl Jam. I mean, I got to know and become friends with all of these guys. And Joe Perry from Aerosmith, who just called me one day out of the blue in 2000, like 9 o'clock on a Monday night, the phone rings. "Hi, it's Joe Perry." And I go, "Hey." And then he doesn't say anything. And after small talking for a few minutes, I go, "Joe, I hope you realize, most people don't answer the phone expecting, 'Hi, it's Joe Perry.' I hope you realize that." But Joe Perry is a very, very sweet person, very generous, warm. Just all the guys in Aerosmith I got to know. They're just great people. They're really nice people. And I ended up, 5 years ago, I went to Brazil for 5 days just to hang out with Joe and play guitar. Wow. And Joe's like the only guy, since I'm 14 years old, where you'd sit with another person and play guitar for 10 hours. And, you'd be like, "I'm hungry."
Do you find any newer musicians that have basically learned how to play the guitar because of you and everything you put together?
We're already into the second generation of that now, because I'm 65, so it's like a 20-year thing. So 20 years ago, I got a phone call from Cherry Lane, and they said, "Oh, have you heard this new guy, John Mayer?" And I heard the song "No Such Thing" was on TV. And they said, "Well, he's a huge fan of yours because he's been reading your transcriptions for years, and he's a Stevie Ray Vaughan fanatic, and he's read every Stevie Ray Vaughan thing you've ever done." So this is in 2000. Steve had been dead for 10 years by that point, and I had written quite a lot of articles. So they said, "Well, we signed him to a publishing deal. He wants you to do the book. Like, can he call you?" I was like, "Yeah, that's fine." And so I worked on that book Room for Squares, his big album with Why Georgia, and I don't know if Your Body is a Wonderland is on that record, but that's the album that he was introduced John Mayer to the world. But we are now 20 years after that, so many of your viewers and listeners probably know Marcus King, who's a young guy, fantastic singer, guitar player, terrific. And I met him about 2 years ago, and I asked him where he was from, and he said he was from Greenville, South Carolina. And I said, I did a gig with Dickie Betts, because I was in Dickie Betts from the Allman Brothers. I was in his band for 10 years, from 2005 to 2014. So I said, we did a gig. I think we did a gig in Greensville, South Carolina. And he goes, you did. I was there. I was 11.
That's great. It's got to be really
and
rewarding.
I said, how was it? And he goes, it was really great.
It was really good. How did you know? All right, now I want to get back to the book because we're running slowly out of time here. But how did you meet Stevie Ray Vaughan, and what inspired you to put this whole thing together?
So, to put it in a nutshell, like most people, I heard Let's Dance, David Bowie, and when the guitar solo came in, I thought it was Albert King. And my first thought was, this is genius. And I was a David Bowie fan and an Albert King fan. And I thought, man, you would never in a million years expect Albert King playing on a David Bowie record. Like, it's genius. Like, it's so cool. Two, like, phenomenally great, really distinct things. Like the guy with chocolate was walking down the street and the other guy has peanut butter, and they bump into each other. And the peanut butter cup was born. It's like that. Anyway, but I soon found out it was a guy named Stevie Ray Vaughan. It wasn't Albert King. And then I went to see Stevie Ray Vaughan in 1984 at my father's place, a great legendary club on Long Island. And then about a year and a half later, I interviewed him in '86. And that was the first of 4 interviews I did with him. But Stevie was about a year and a half older than me. And when I went to that first interview, first thing that happened was we just started to jam. And we played for 10 minutes. And he was, like totally into it. And then when we stopped and I took my guitar off, he said, what are you doing? I said, well, I have to interview you. And he said, I thought we were just going to have fun. So he was a great guy, interviewed him many times. He almost died from substance abuse. Big part of his story and a big part of the book is embracing sobriety. And we've learned since we put the book out that that's probably the most powerful part of Stevie's story, and continues to be, is him helping people in the simplest way, which is if there's something in your life that you're unhappy about, that maybe there's something you can do about it and make your life a happier life. If that means stopping drinking and doing drugs, it's that. For many people, it's other things. But he was the embodiment of someone who was very aware that he almost died from his own hand. He'd even say to me, I don't deserve any credit for the fact that I didn't die. My best thinking, this is an exact quote, my best thinking was going to kill me. It's only other people are the reason that I'm not dead. And so I want to spend the rest of my days making it clear to everyone that you need to look around you, and there's people around you who care about you, and then you should look for people that you should care about. Like, this is such a really, what a beautiful thing. He wasn't just this amazing guitar player who's going to be influential forever as a guitarist. He's was a beautiful person. So anyway, he dies, this terrible, tragic death in 1990, and I start writing stories about that. And I get to know Chris Layton and Tommy Shannon, his bandmates in Double Trouble. Then they form a band called Archangels with Doyle Bramhall, too, and Charlie Sexton, so I interview them about that. And then they form a band called Storyville with David Grissom and David Holt and Malford Milliken, and I write stories about that. And then somewhere in the mid-'90s, I send them recordings of me, and they like my playing, and they invite me to come and play shows and do recordings with them. And so by 2000... 10 years after Stevie died, and that's 21 years ago now, I had become such good friends with them. I'd go to Austin and stay at Tommy Shannon's house. And so what all this is leading up to is Guitar World asked me to write a gigantic 10-year anniversary of Stevie's passing story for the magazine. And I went and stayed at Tommy's house for 3 days and came home with 14 90-minute tapes.
Wow.
Okay, so that's roughly 20 hours of interviews. And I transcribed all of it when I got home. And it was like 70 pages long or something. You know, it was like ridiculous.
Yeah.
So my co-writer on this book, Alan Paul, wrote a book called One Way Out, History of the Allman Brothers. And it's an oral history, meaning everything in the book is quotes from Dickie Betts and Greg Allman and, you know, all the members of the band and the significant people around them. And the book made the New York Times bestseller list. It did well. So St. Martin's Press, the publisher, asked him, do you want to write another book? And he said, yes, I'd like to write a book about Stevie, but I've never met Stevie. And we had become very good friends, you know, from writing, both writing for Guitar World. He said, I'd like to do it with my friend Andy because he's... So that's, I had 35 years of content.
It's almost natural to do it. You had
Thank
no
God
plan
this
for
came
it,
along
but,
like
yeah.
as a sort of container. But it also gave us the opportunity to then ask Jimmy Vaughan, his older brother, and all of his relatives, or many of them, cousins, and including his aunt, his mother's sister, who was well into her 90s. And they all participated in the writing of the book. And so...
They really hadn't before either. It was kind of rare that they...
That never happened before. There was one book called Caught in the Crossfire by Joe Nick Petoskey and Bill Crawford that came out in 92. But it was really fresh off Stevie dying. And a lot of his friends and people close to him felt like it just felt a little opportunistic to write a book about Stevie right after he died. And so there were a few people who participated in the book. I don't want to, you know, slight Joe Nick Petoskey and Bill Crawford at all, but most people did not. And
this is comprehensive. If I'm not mistaken, I think you spoke to like 400 people in different conversations.
We
to put
spoke
this
to
whole
about
thing.
110 people.
Or 400
but
conversations.
Yes, 400 interviews because many
Either
of those,
way, very
many
impressive.
of those people were interviewed 3 or 4 times. And so...
Did you enjoy the process of writing the book and putting it together?
It was pretty horrible.
Well, I'm curious, do you want to do another one? Is there an artist that you kind of want to...
There is not a specific artist because there's no artist that I had this kind of connection to.
Gotcha.
Like,
that makes sense.
I mean, I got to know Stevie and play with him, and
That's personal.
And we were almost the same age, and we liked Hendrix. You know, we had a lot of the same likes and dislikes, and I mean, he told me some really personal stuff about his struggles with just not just substances, but like he said to me, when I got sober, my first thought was, oh, how am I going to play guitar? And then I learned that playing guitar was like the way down the list of like the how am I going to things now that I'm sober. Number one was, how am I going to live? Like, how am I going to, you know, answer the phone and have, you know, be together or live a happy life? Like, he had no idea how to live sober. No idea. That was the, you know, the riddle to solve. How do I live a sober life? And so that's something that obviously many people can relate to.
Yeah.
So
congratulations. The book is out there now. Texas Flood, the inside story of Stevie Ray Vaughan. You've got the band, the Groove Kings, that
Yes,
you're doing
sir.
a lot of stuff with it. We have to quickly wrap up here in a minute, so I'm sorry to rush you. But you're working on a new record. When do you plan on trying to put all of it together and try to get it out there, the new album?
I hope, you know, my wishes are to get in the studio in the next, you know, few weeks, few months. It would take a while, and I'm, you know, back to writing new music all the time. So
That's great.
You know, maybe it's not unrealistic by the fall I could finally get this record out. And we're starting to gig more, you know, like we have the Talk House coming up on June 5th. And there's a variety of other gigs people can see on my website.
What is your website? And I'm sure
It's
you'll
just
put it up.
it's just Andy Aledort, ANDYALEDORT, AndyAledort.com. And you click on the links, on the gigs link, and you'll see all the gigs up there. And it's really nice to get back to, you know, playing parties outside, and everyone's vaccinated, so it's sort of mind-blowing for everybody that, you know, and they're also happy to embrace, oh, I can shake hands with someone, I can hug someone, I could stand in a crowd, and So,
We're,
knock
we're
wood.
getting, we're getting back at it. Congratulations on the book, and congratulations on getting back out there in the future. Andy Aledort, thank you so much. I really
Thank
appreciate
you,
it.
really
Thanks
appreciate
for your time.